You're an embarrassment to this family." My mother said it loud enough for the entire Rideau Center food court to hear. "Sit down there with the children. The adults have reservations upstairs." She pressed 2 fingers into my shoulder and steered me toward a plastic chair at an A&W table, where my niece and nephew were already slurping their root beers through striped paper straws. I was 41 years old, I had just flown in from Geneva, and I was carrying the check that had quietly kept this family solvent for the past 16 years. I sat down, I didn't argue. That was my first mistake, and it had also been my mistake every single time before this. If you've ever been the invisible one, the one who gives everything and gets the plastic chair, please stay with me, because you need to hear how this ended. It started the way it always started, with my mother's voice on the phone 3 days before Christmas, bright and brittle as ornament glass. "We're doing the family lunch at Becta this year. Your sister's husband made the reservation months ago. Private room, prefix, the works." A pause. "I've already told them 12 covers, I didn't include you." I was standing in my apartment in the glebe looking out at the canal. The ice hadn't set yet. Gray water, gray sky. "Why not?" I asked. I already knew, but I asked anyway. "Sweetheart." She said the word the way people say obviously. "You know how these things are, your brother-in-law's partners will be there, the Renfrew side of the family. It's a certain kind of lunch." A certain kind of lunch. Code 4, not the kind where you show up in your government-issue wool coat and order the cheapest thing on the menu. "I'll pay for myself," I said. "It isn't about the money, Vivienne. It was always about the money. Your sister will drop something off at yours on Boxing Day. She's making her brisket." She hung up before I could respond. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter. Outside, 2 teenagers were throwing snow at each other across the bridge. I watched them for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and checked the automated transfer I had set up 11 years ago through a numbered company in Ontario. $4,200 a month, routed through a family trust my mother believed had been set up by my late father's accountant. It had not been set up by my late father's accountant. It had been set up by me, 3 months after I took the senior policy position at Global Affairs, when I discovered my mother was 2 payments away from losing the house in Rockcliffe. She had never asked where the money came from. She had never asked because she assumed it came from my father's estate, and I had never corrected her, and that arrangement had suited us both for a very long time. I closed the laptop. I did not cancel the transfer. Not yet. You have to understand what my childhood looked like before you can understand why I kept paying. My sister is 4 years younger than me and has always been the kind of beautiful that makes rooms rearrange themselves. She married a man who made a great deal of money in commercial real estate in Ottawa and has spent the last 15 years deploying that money with the focused intensity of someone who grew up without it, which she did not, but which she performs convincingly. My mother has always preferred her. This is not a thing I say with bitterness. It is simply a fact, the way it is a fact that the Rideau River runs east. My sister has my mother's coloring, my mother's laugh, my mother's particular talent for walking into a room and recalibrating it around herself. I have my father's posture, my father's silences, and my father's habit of being the most useful person in a situation while receiving the least credit for it. My father died when I was 26. He left behind a house with a significant mortgage, a family that did not know how to function without him, and me. I was already working at the department by then. Junior analyst, nothing glamorous. But I was good at it, and I moved quickly, and within 4 years I was being sent to Brussels and then to Geneva for trade negotiations that the newspapers occasionally mentioned in the middle of the international section. My mother called those trips your little work trips. She called my apartment that place downtown. She called my job whatever it is you do with all those papers. She called my sister my heart. I kept paying the mortgage. I kept paying the property tax. When the furnace blew in January 2019 and the replacement quote came in at $14,000, I transferred the money within 48 hours. My mother told her book club that the insurance had covered it. I am not telling you this, so you will feel sorry for me. I am telling you this so you will understand that by the time she steered me toward the plastic chair at the A&W, I had spent 16 years making myself small enough to fit into the space she had assigned me, while simultaneously making myself large enough to hold everything up. I was very tired. Christmas Eve that year, I drove to Rockcliffe for the family dinner. Not Becta, that was the next day. The curated lunch, the one I hadn't been invited to. This was the home dinner, the one where I was permitted to attend because someone had to help carry things from the car. I pulled up to the house I had been paying for since 2008 and sat in my car for a moment. The windows were warm. Through the front bay, I could see the tree, 12 feet, professionally decorated, the kind that costs more than most people's rent. My sister had organized it. My mother had approved it. I had indirectly funded it. I got out of the car. The cold hit me immediately, that particular Ottawa cold that gets underneath your coat before you've even zipped it. I grabbed the 2 bags of groceries I'd brought, ingredients for the trifle nobody had asked me to make but that everyone would eat, and walked up the front steps. My sister opened the door before I knocked. She was already dressed for dinner in a cashmere wrap the color of burgundy. She looked at my grocery bags the way people look at luggage that's arrived on the wrong carousel. "You didn't have to do all that," she said, meaning she wished I hadn't. "It's fine," I said. I wanted to. Inside, the house smelled of roasting duck and something my brother-in-law had been doing with mulled wine since noon. 8 people were already distributed across the living room in that particular configuration. That meant all the good chairs were taken. My mother was in the wingback by the fireplace. She looked up when I came in, noted the grocery bags, and said, "Put those in the kitchen, would you? And can you check on the potatoes while you're in there? Your sister has been on her feet all day." My sister, who had been sitting on the sofa with a glass of wine, nodded sympathetically at this description of her exhaustion. I put the groceries in the kitchen. I checked on the potatoes. I set the table because no one else did. 12 place settings, the good china, the crystal glasses, the silver that my mother had inherited from her own mother, and that I had once spent an entire Sunday in November polishing because she'd mentioned offhandedly that it had gone dark. I found my place card at the far end, beside my nephew and a great-aunt who had been growing progressively harder of hearing since 2015. At dinner, my brother-in-law described a real estate deal he'd closed in Canada that had returned, and here he paused for effect, significantly above projection. My mother asked follow-up questions with the alert attention she reserved for subjects she found important. My sister talked about the ski trip they were planning to Whistler. My nephew asked for more duck. My great-aunt asked me to repeat everything twice. Midway through the main course, my brother-in-law turned to me. "And what have you been up to, Vivienne? Still doing the government thing?" "Still doing the government thing," I said. "Good pension, at least," he said, and turned back to my sister. My mother, without looking at me, said she was in Geneva again last month. "Some kind of conference." "Oh, nice," my sister said. "Was it nice?" "It was work," I said. "Right," my sister said, and reached for the gravy. After dinner, when the plates had been cleared, I cleared them. My mother distributed Christmas envelopes. She did this every year, a tradition she'd maintained since my father died. Crisp white envelopes with our names written in her careful cursive. Inside was always a check. She handed my sister hers first. Then my brother-in-law. Then my nephew and niece, the children's amounts, which she announced aloud with great warmth. Then the great-aunt. Then she reached the end of the envelopes. She looked up. "Vivienne." She held out a thin envelope. "I know it isn't much. You're the practical one. You don't need fussing over." I took the envelope. Inside was a gift card to Chapters for $25 and a note in her handwriting that said, "For your reading. I know you love that." My sister's envelope had held a check for $3,000. I had seen it when I'd handed her a napkin for the wine she'd spilled. $3,000. The mortgage payment I'd made 4 days earlier had been $4,200. I folded the $25 gift card back into the envelope. My nephew leaned across and whispered, "Mom got a lot more than that. He wasn't being cruel. He was 8. He just hadn't learned yet which things you say out loud." Nobody corrected him. Under the table, I pressed my thumbnail into my palm, just to feel something solid. I drove home that night on the 417 with the radio off. When I got back to the glebe, I made tea and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. I pulled up the trust documents. I looked at 16 years of transfer records, the tidy columns of dates and amounts, the unremarkable accounting of everything I had held together from a distance, while being told I was the impractical one, the work one, the one who didn't need fussing over. $2,340,000 over 16 years. I had done the calculation before, but I did it again that night. It had the same effect each time, a kind of windless feeling, like standing at the edge of something very high. I did not cancel the transfer that night. But I started drafting a letter I had been composing in my head since approximately 2011. The lunch at Becta happened without me, the way these things do. My sister texted a photo, the private room, the white tablecloths, 12 people in their Christmas clothes raising glasses. My mother was at the head of the table. She looked wonderful. She did not text me separately. I spent Christmas Day walking along the canal. It had frozen overnight, that fast, hard freeze that sometimes comes between Christmas and New Year's, and people were already out on it with their skates and their Tim Hortons cups and their children in bright-colored snowsuits. I thought about my father. He had known, I think, that he was leaving me with something that wasn't quite fair. He'd pulled me aside 2 weeks before he died. We didn't know it was 2 weeks. It felt like the beginning of a long bad chapter, not the end. And he'd said, "Look after them." He'd meant my mother and my sister. He'd said it to me because he knew my sister would look after herself, and he knew I would do what needed doing. I had done what needed doing. I wondered if he'd known the cost. In early February, my department sent me to Toronto for 3 days of intergovernmental meetings. On the second evening, At a dinner that a deputy minister had organized at a restaurant on King Street West, I was introduced to a woman named Dr. Osi Mensah, the incoming chair of the Federal Advisory Board on Multilateral Trade Policy. She was the kind of person who makes you feel that the room has gotten smarter since she walked in. We ended up seated next to each other. We talked for 3 hours. At one point she said, "I've read your Geneva brief. It's the clearest thing I've read out of that department in a decade." "How long have you been doing this work?" 18 years, I said. "And you're where in the hierarchy?" I told her. She set down her fork. "Why?" It was a small word for a large question. I didn't have a clean answer. The real answer involved a lot of things I hadn't said out loud to very many people: the transfers, the trust, the sense that I had made myself invisible in my professional life, the same way I'd made myself invisible at my mother's dinner table, because visible things get examined and I had constructed a life that could not survive too much examination. "I'm working on that," I said. She gave me her card. Here is what my mother did not know about my job. She knew I worked at Global Affairs. She knew I went to conferences occasionally. She knew, in the vague way that people know things they haven't paid much attention to, that I had something to do with trade policy. She did not know that 3 years earlier, I had been the lead Canadian negotiator on a bilateral framework agreement with the EU that had taken 22 months to complete, and that the trade minister had called, in a press conference I had not attended because I was already on a plane to Seoul, the most significant trade achievement of the decade. She did not know that my name was on the agreement. She did not know that the agreement was now studied in policy programs at 3 Canadian universities. She did not know that 2 months after the Geneva meetings in December, I had been asked, quietly, through channels that operate quietly, whether I would be interested in the position of Assistant Deputy Minister. I had said I needed time to consider it. She did not know any of this because she had never asked. My sister called in March. "Mom's been talking about the cottage," she said. The cottage was on Rideau Lake, the one we'd had since childhood, the one whose property taxes I'd been paying for 12 years. "What about it?" I said. "She wants to do a big family weekend in June, everyone. The kids, us, the cousins from Kingston." A pause. "She wants you to drive up early to open it, get the water running, deal with the dock, that kind of thing. And then," I said. "And then you'd be there for the weekend." "Would I be there as a guest?" I said. "Or as the person who opened it?" My sister was quiet for a moment. "Vivienne, why do you have to make everything so hard?" I hung up. That was new. I had never hung up before. I sat with it for a minute, the click of the call ending, the silence of my apartment, and I noticed that I felt something I hadn't expected. Not guilt, not the usual anxious rehearsal of what I should have said, just a kind of steadiness. I picked up my phone again and called my financial advisor. "I need to restructure the Whitfield Trust," I said. "I want a wind-down timeline, 30 days notice to existing commitments, then termination." There was a pause. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said. "Start the paperwork." I did not tell my mother. I gave 30 days as I'd said I would. The April payment went through, the May payment went through, the June payment did not. I was in Vancouver in early June for meetings that had been scheduled since January. I was not at the cottage. My mother called on a Thursday afternoon, while I was between sessions in a glass-walled conference room in a tower downtown, looking out at the mountains and the water. "The trust payment hasn't come," she said. "No, hello." "I know," I said. A long pause. "What do you mean, you know?" "I mean, I know it hasn't come because I stopped it." Another pause. Longer. "I don't understand what you're saying." Her voice had dropped to something I hadn't heard before, not anger yet. Something beneath anger. Something that sounded, strangely, like fear. "The trust was funded by me," I said. "It has been for 16 years. Every mortgage payment, every property tax bill, the furnace in 2019, the roof in 2021, all of it. I set it up 3 months after Dad died, when you were 2 payments from losing the house." Silence. "I'm not going to keep funding it," I said. "I should have had this conversation years ago. I'm sorry I didn't, Vivienne." Her voice had gone very small. You can't just." "I've given 30 days notice to the trust administrator," I said. "That covers you through the end of May. You have time to make arrangements." She said several things after that. She said I was being cruel. She said this was because of the Christmas lunch, that I had always been sensitive about the Christmas lunch, that I needed to understand that these decisions were complicated and involved other people's feelings. She said she was my mother. She said my father would be devastated. She said she had given up everything for her children. I listened to all of it. I let her finish. "I know you're frightened," I said. "I understand this is a shock, but I'm not going to argue about it. If you want to talk when you're ready, I'm here." I hung up, gently this time. I stood at the window for a moment. The mountains were very sharp against the afternoon sky. A float plane was coming in low over the water. Then I picked up my coffee and walked back into the meeting room. The call I hadn't expected came 6 days later from my sister. She had found out my mother had told her, presumably in the same state of bewilderment she'd been in during our call, and she was, as she put it, devastated. She was, as she put it, shocked. She was, as she also put it, furious. How could you do this to her, my sister said. How could you do this to us? I'm not doing anything to you, I said. I'm stopping doing something for you. There's a difference. She could lose the house. She could, I said. She also has options she hasn't explored because she's never needed to, because I was always there to make sure she didn't. That's not something I'm willing to keep doing. You never said anything. All these years, you never— I know, I said. I should have. I thought I was helping. You were helping, she said. Why would you stop? I almost laughed. Because helping that way was making me invisible, I said. Because I've been invisible for a very long time and I'm done with it. My sister was quiet. I'll help her find financial advice, I said. I'll help her understand her options. But I'm not going to keep funding a life where I sit at the children's table. Another silence. I didn't know about the trust, my sister finally said, and there was something different in her voice now, not softer, exactly, but less certain. I know you didn't, I said. 3 weeks later, my department held its annual spring reception at a venue on Wellington Street. The kind of event where ministers come and go, and speeches are made, and people stand in clusters with their glasses of Ontario wine and talk about things that matter in the particular way that Ottawa things matter. I was there in my capacity as Senior Policy Director. I had been in that capacity for 6 years. I had also, 2 weeks prior, accepted the ADM appointment, which had not yet been announced publicly. My mother was not there. There was no reason for her to be there. But my sister's husband's firm had done work for a crown corporation, and through some chain of connections I hadn't tracked carefully enough, my brother-in-law was there, with my sister on his arm, both of them holding wine and talking to a deputy minister I knew well. I saw them before they saw me. I had a choice. I could redirect, find another cluster, another conversation, wait for the crowd to shift. I didn't redirect, I walked over. The deputy minister said with the warmth he reserved for people he respected. I'm glad you're here. I was just about to tell are these friends of yours? My sister, I said, and her husband. My sister's face had done something complicated in the last 10 seconds. Oh, wonderful, the deputy minister said. Well, then you must be so proud of her. We were just about to make the announcement, actually. Deputy Minister Chen thought the reception was the right occasion. He glanced at his watch. About 15 minutes. My brother-in-law looked at me. What announcement? Assistant Deputy Minister, International Trade, I said. It was confirmed last month. The Deputy Minister beamed. Youngest ADM in the department's history, actually, and frankly, long overdue. He placed his hand briefly on my arm. I'll leave you three to catch up. Don't disappear before the remarks, Vivienne. He moved off toward another group. My brother-in-law was very still. My sister looked at me. Really looked at me the way she hadn't in a very long time, not past me, not through me, not at the useful quiet version of me she'd learned to take for granted. I didn't know, she said. I know, I said. I wasn't angry, I was just very clear. That's because no one ever asked. The remarks were made 15 minutes later. My name was spoken in a room full of people who understood what it meant. Applause, real applause, the kind that comes from recognition, not courtesy. My sister stood at the edge of the room and watched. Afterward, she found me. I said things to Mom, she said. About you, about the trust. She stopped. I said things that weren't fair. I know, I said. I didn't know what you were carrying. Nobody did, I said. I made sure of that. That was my mistake. She looked at me for a moment. My sister, who has always been beautiful in the way that rooms rearranged themselves, looked older than I'd seen her look in a long time. Not badly older, just real. What happens now? She said. We figure out a new arrangement, I said. One that's honest, one where I don't disappear. She nodded slowly. Mom isn't going to take this well, she said. No, I said. But she's going to have to. My mother and I did not speak for 2 months. I am not proud of that, and I am also not ashamed of it. It was what the silence needed to be. She called on a Sunday in August. She was at the cottage, she'd managed to keep it, with my sister's help, and a line of credit and a frank conversation with a financial planner that I had arranged, though I had not attended. She called, and for the first time in my memory, she asked me about my work. Not the government thing, not your little papers. She used the actual title, she'd looked it up. She asked what I was working on. I told her. She listened, mostly. She asked one question that showed she'd understood. I answered it. At the end of the call, she said, I didn't know what you were doing over there all these years. I know, I said. I should have asked? Yes, I said. You should have. A long pause. I'm sorry, Vivienne. It wasn't everything I might have wanted from an apology. It was 3 words without much decoration. But it was real. I could hear that it was real, in the particular flatness of her voice that meant she wasn't performing. Thank you, I said. We talked for another 20 minutes about ordinary things. The cottage, the canal, the fact that winter was coming early this year. When I hung up, I sat for a while in my apartment in the Glebe. The thing about being invisible for a very long time is that when people finally start to see you, it doesn't feel like triumph. It feels quieter than that. It feels like stepping out of a room you'd forgotten you were trapped in, blinking at the daylight, not quite sure yet how to stand in it. But you learn. You learn to stand in it, and you find, slowly, imperfectly, in the particular way that difficult things get better, that the light is not as unfamiliar as you feared. The wolves who kept themselves invisible for too long don't need anyone's applause to know what they've survived. They just need to finally stop running in the wrong direction. I wasn't running anymore.